Hey folks, Eric Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast. We've got the first major foreign policy test for the Biden administration. Will they pass it? We're about to find out. Yesterday, Monday, February 15th, 14 rockets were launched at a U.S. base in northern Iraq, in Erbil, the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan. Now, one U.S. serviceman was injured. Several more American contractors were also wounded, and one foreign contractor who had been working closely with U.S. forces there in Iraq was killed. So this was a deadly attack on a U.S. base. Again, 14 rockets fired, at least 3 of them reportedly hit their mark. Now, an Iraqi Shia militia, a little known apparently, calling itself the Guardians of Blood, have claimed responsibility for the attack. They say their goal is to end the American occupation of Iraq. And by the way, the American troop presence in Iraq has been winding down steadily since 2017. There are about 2,500 U.S. troops still in Iraq, and most of them are in that Erbil area. And the attack, by the way, the base situated right near the Erbil International Airport, which is just south of the city. Folks, I just flew through there in September 2019. We're going to show you a clip from that trip in a minute. Very important. We were with the Kurdish Peshmerga talking about the rise of these Iranian-backed Shia militias, the type which carried out this deadly attack against a U.S. base. Now, the U.S. Secretary of State, the new U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, responded right away, called it an outrageous attack, and said that those responsible will be held accountable by the United States. That brings us to, as I mentioned at the top, the first major, to my mind, foreign policy challenge of the Biden administration. Now, let's rewind for a minute to the previous administration and how President Trump handled these rocket attacks, which are very frequent against U.S. interests in Iraq. Last December 2019, there was a deadly attack in which a U.S. contractor in Iraq was killed by one of these rocket attacks. Now, that was in Baghdad. Most of these attacks have come actually in and around the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, Iraq. That's why yesterday's attack was very interesting, folks, and troubling to me, because Kurdistan is kind of like an island in a way, and Erbil has not been targeted on a frequent basis, but all of a sudden, pretty bold of the Iranian regime to order one of its proxies to strike at Erbil. But the attack last year targeted Baghdad. A U.S. contractor was killed. President Trump right away said zero tolerance for this. He carried out major airstrikes against Kataib Hezbollah, which is the Iraqi Shia group which was behind these rocket attacks in December 2019. Iranian-backed, surprise, surprise, an Iranian proxy. President Trump responded forcefully. Several of these Kataib Hezbollah fighters were killed. And then we learned in early January 2020 that more of these attacks against U.S. troops in Iraq were in the works, courtesy of Iran's terror kingpin, Qasem Soleimani, the architect of their terror strategy in Iraq and around the world, really. So, before that had a chance to come to fruition, President Trump ordered an airstrike which took out Qasem Soleimani and a leader of Kataib Hezbollah on January 3rd, 2020, which obviously rocked the Middle East, and the repercussions of that are still being felt today. But talk about message sent and a zero-tolerance policy for these rocket attacks that kill Americans in Iraq to take out Qasem Soleimani, who is arguably the second most powerful man in Iran, sent quite the message. But Iran, for a time, they were reeling after the death of Soleimani in January 2020. It was relative silence for a while. Then again, March 2020, another rocket attack killed a U.S. soldier, a U.S. contractor, and a British citizen in Iraq. Another one of these rocket attacks. And President Trump again responded forcefully with airstrikes right away. If ISIS would have succeeded, and they didn't because the Peshmerga defeated them, If they had succeeded in taking this area, where would they have gone next?
If we hadn't taken this area, that would be the cutoff between Erbil and Duhok. So it would be a real threat and dangerous for us. There was also another point that ISIS was trying to attack, because there is a historic Christian monastery on this mountain. It is 1,600 years old. They were trying to take down this monastery as well.
Now ISIS is in shambles, defeated here, but these Iraqi Shia militias. General, if you can, tell us more about the threat posed by these Iranian-sponsored, key point there, Iraqi Shia militias. The front line, you still have the front line. The front line hasn't gone away because you just have a new danger in the form of these Shia militias.
There is no difference. The only difference between ISIS and the Shia militia front lines is there is no shootings. Otherwise, we are holding the lines as before. They are now holding the ISIS lines. We were holding the ground until October 16, 2017. Then the Iranian-backed Shia militias attacked this area, and they came back to the same ISIS lines with the support of Iran. As I mentioned before, these Shia militias formed under the name of Shia militias, but they're the same as Iranian Revolutionary Guards. And as long as there is Iranian influence in Iraq, the situation will go on.
Okay, as we wind down here, the gauntlet clearly has been laid down by the Iranian regime behind this rocket attack yesterday that, look, murdered one civilian, injured several Americans, including a U.S. soldier. Now what does the Biden administration do?
Welcome back. Well, Iran's long-range missiles splashed down 100 miles from U.S. Navy ships. Officials confirm exclusively to Fox News. The Revolutionary Guard's drill Saturday serving as a show of force just days before President Trump leaves office. But Israeli media reports Joe Biden's incoming administration is quietly already holding talks with Tehran to rejoin the 2015 nuclear deal. Let's bring in Fox News senior strategic analyst and retired four-star General Jack Keane. General, thank you so much. Is the Biden administration just blindly going right back to what they thought was the right thing in 2015, regardless of the evidence laid before us of who the Iranians are and what they really want to do?
Yeah, I hope not, Pete, but certainly that seems to be the indication. They did secret talks for well over a year during the Obama administration, and some of the same players who were involved then now have positions inside the Biden administration. One is Wendy Sherman, who was the chief negotiator, and she's going to be the Deputy Secretary of State. The other is Tony Blinken, who's nominated to be Secretary of State, and also Jake Sullivan, who's he's been selected to be the National Security Advisor. So, yes, I think those of us who recognize that the conditions have so dramatically changed that we have increased leverage, not to go back to the original deal, but to get a better deal.
Contact on 4 Iranian Kush WPB bearing 270 relative at 300 yards. Bridge-to-bridge counts were conducted, no response. Weapons uncovered, man conducting routine spirit patrol. Appears to be unsafe, unprofessional.
Senior U.S. defense officials confirmed to Fox News 4 vessels from Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps harassed an American naval destroyer yesterday near the Strait of Hormuz. That's the video you're looking at now. 2 Iranian boats reportedly came within 300 yards of the USS Nitz. The U.S. Navy is calling the high-speed intercept by Iran unsafe and unprofessional. This is a Fox News alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. It is another provocative move by Iran, adding to a long list, even after the nuclear deal with the U.S., capturing U.S. sailors, test-firing ballistic missiles, continuing to fund terrorist groups, rhetorically threatening the U.S. and Israel. Meanwhile, confirming today that just 2 days after steering $400 million in cash to Iran in a covert payment timed to coincide with the release of American hostages, President Obama and his administration paid the Islamic Republic 3 times that amount, another $1.3 billion in interest, wiring that money directly to Iran in 3 payments. Correspondent James Rosen at the State Department. Good evening, James.
Brett, good evening. For the first time, the State Department has provided a timeline on when it made this $1.3 billion interest payment to Iran. Following a series of explosive reports from the Wall Street Journal, the Obama administration this month has sought to rebut charges that it paid ransom for 5 Americans released from Iranian captivity back in January, even as senior U.S. officials now admit they withheld the $400 million assembled in hard foreign currency until they received word that the hostages were being set free. A linkage of the prisoner release to the payments that spokesman for the State Department had previously denied. Now, in response to a report in the New York Sun, the Obama administration has confirmed that it was just 2 days later, on January 19th, that a Treasury Department account known as the Judgment Fund was used to send Iran an additional 13 payments, each for $99,999,999.99, or roughly $100 million. However, the State Department today refused to provide additional information about the unusual amounts used, why hard foreign currency was used for the initial payment, or why the ledger shows a 14th payment in the amount of nearly $10.4 million.
We do make a practice of not commenting publicly on transactions, including settlement payments, due to the confidential nature of those payments and to respect the privacy of our international partners.
The chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee told Fox News last week and reiterated to us again just a few minutes ago that he will hold hearings on this subject.
We want to know who authorized this. We want to know when. We want to know the timing. And we also want to know the particulars about the cash and the payments. Why unmarked bills when other avenues were possible in terms of satisfying whatever interests the government may have had.
Now, those 13 payments of roughly $100 million each left 13 cents unaccounted for. That led Matt Lee of the Associated Press, the dean of the State Department Press Corps, to ask the department if it intended to use those 13 cents as leverage for the next round of American hostages in Iran. Brett.
Unbelievable. James Rosen at the State Department.
One
James,
is the Iranians took the money from the sanction relief, and as opposed to becoming a responsible nation, which was one of the goals of the nuclear deal, they increased their malign behavior in the region. Everything got worse. They toppled the Yemen government. They increased resources to the civil war in Syria. They undermined the Iraqi government and targeted U.S. troops. This is what they've been up to for 5 years. Then the second thing is the Trump sanctions are crippling Iran. That gives Biden huge leverage because the Iranians are desperate this time for the deal, much like Obama wanted the deal more than anything else. This time the Iranians are in that position. Let's use that as leverage. And also, we have the Abraham Accords. We have a coalition of Arabs and Israel who are now working against Iran, which is the principal reason why they've come together. We have to use that as leverage and certainly get something out of this.
It remains to be seen. The promise has been made by Blinken that consequences are in the offing. But what Iran is doing here, folks, is attempting that blackmail strategy, basically saying we are going to behave badly. We're going to carry out terror attacks, stir things up in the region, threaten U.S. troops in the Middle East, and also enrich uranium to new heights and drive towards a nuclear weapon. We are going to do all of this, America, until you come back to the negotiating table and give us what we want. Give us a sweet deal, a revamped Iran nuclear deal where we get all the perks, all the sanctions relief. Our pockets are filled with billions and billions of dollars that we can use not to build schools and playgrounds and infrastructure in Iran, but to build ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons. That's the game, folks. It is a blackmail situation. Iran is saying, if you don't give us what we want, we're going to behave very badly and make your lives miserable. And unfortunately, Europe and previous U.S. administrations, I'm talking in particular about the Obama administration, took the bait and played the Iranians' game. President Trump did not play the game. I fear that Joe Biden may be willing to once again march to the drummer of the Iranian regime and let them set the tone for how the relationship is going to be. We'll see how they respond to this foreign policy test that emerged yesterday in northern Iraq.